Hi everyone, welcome to the May 31st edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski as we are looking ahead to some weekend racing at Churchill Downs. Stakes-laden card at Churchill on Saturday, 11 races in total. We're going to focus on the late pick 5 sequence, races 7 through 11, which are all stakes races, an interesting group of races at a variety of distances, surfaces, we hope. There is rain in the forecast really for this entire Churchill Downs card on Saturday. 2 of the stakes races in this sequence are carded for turf, so hopefully we stay on. I know that the situation can get dicey when that Churchill turf course takes rain. They don't want to run over it when it gets very wet, so fingers crossed that the forecast changes between now, when we're recording this on Friday morning, and tomorrow, Saturday, but looks a little on the fence for turf racing tomorrow, Craig, but we're going to hope for the best as we discuss this sequence.
Yeah, I sure hope it doesn't rain because I think it's a solid sequence. Certainly, as a racing fan, it has some star power, and I think some of these are pretty competitive races. It's not one, as we'll talk about, I don't think I would play a huge ticket in here because I'm not totally against a lot of the favorites in here, but I do think it's a good card, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think there are some interesting things to discuss throughout this sequence, and we'll dive in more as we go through each race. But I mean, you've got a horse in the first leg that I think is going to be a tempting single for a lot of people. We'll discuss whether or not Skelly is the horse that you really want to lean on in that Aristes. I think there are some expected scratches later on, particularly in the Blame Stakes. I think there were 3 horses entered in that 11-horse field that would appear unlikely to run. So we'll talk about that. I think there's another expected scratch in a different race. With these races run on the surfaces we're expecting them to be run over, obviously, if these races get taken off the turf, there'll be a plethora of scratches, and this probably is a sequence that we're not going to want to play in that situation, since none of those turf races feature main track only runners, and really not too many with dirt form that will be looking to move up on the dirt. So hopefully we don't encounter that situation, but we're going to discuss this as if these races are on the surfaces that they are scheduled for. And Craig, why don't we just dive in with the discussion of that big favorite in the race that kicks off this sequence, race 7, the Aristes Stakes, and I'll share my screen to go through the past performances. Skelly is the center of the conversation here, and I think there is no doubt that Skelly has shown himself to be one of the fastest sprinters in the country. You can clearly see that looking at his series of TimeformUS speed figures coming into this race. I don't know if there's anybody else in the country that has earned a 130 plus number so far in 2024, and he's just consistently running those numbers in that range, high 120s. I guess the issue with Skelly, Craig, is boy, has he had a busy schedule since coming back basically around New Year's Day on December 30th of last year. This will be his 6th race since then, just on the 1st of June. So basically running every month. Included in that schedule was a ship all the way over to the Middle East to race in Saudi Arabia. Typically, you don't see horses who make that move run as frequently as Skelly has been. And for a horse who's considered to be one of the fastest horses in the country, it is kind of striking to look back through his past performances, and he's only raced in 2 graded stakes races. Those were only grade 3 events. It was the Count Fleet Stakes in 2 separate years. Steve Asmussen has kind of avoided running him in the top graded stakes in this division. He could be running in the True North on Belmont Stakes weekend. He's not doing that. He's running here in this listed stakes race. It's just a little bit strange to me, the placement of a horse like this. And I wonder if he's going to be able to hold his form for the rest of the year. There's no doubt, just based on the race this came up and the pace situation, his ability, he is the horse to be by far the most likely winner. It's just a question of whether or not you want to rely on him to hold that form. What do you think about Skelly?
Yeah, I think there's some, obviously the positives are how fast he is, not just overall speed figures, but just how fast he is early. We've seen him the last couple races not get out of the gate very well, and it simply hasn't mattered. Once he gets his legs under him, he simply zips to the front and runs everybody off their feet. And it's just a matter of how long he can keep doing that. I know we had thought about this horse a lot last year when he was running quick figures and thinking that, and not running in the biggest races, and thinking maybe he was a horse that really needed Lasix, but he is not really run on Lasix this year in any of his previous 4 starts. So that obviously hasn't proven to be the case. The only thing I can figure is, I mean, he's a gelding after all. So this is a big purse race. And, I guess the graded stakes, what does it really matter when you're a gelding? It's not like he's building a resume to go to stud. He's just piling up money. And this race is probably an easy spot. So for me personally, I'm not going to be against Skelly in here. It would be kind of risky to just assume a horse who's probably going to be 2 to 5 is just suddenly not going to show up. So I would definitely feature him prominently on my tickets. I'm not sure if I could get there as a single because, like I said, the one thing is he hasn't been getting out of the gate. But as I look through this field, there's just not a ton of speed in here. And the horses that do have speed are nowhere near as quick as him. And it just, to me, seems like another easy spot where as long as he's in reasonable form, he's just going to romp again.
Yeah, maybe it just does come down to the fact that he is a gelding, as you noted, and they're not looking to necessarily run him in all of the toughest races. He does feel like a horse that could be sprint champion. And before eventually you have to find out if he can be a Breeders' Cup sprint winner. Even being a gelding, I don't think just because he's a gelding, you want to avoid being champion sprinter. So he's running in races that don't necessarily advance that potential goal. But still, it's a long way out from November when they run the Breeders' Cup. And really, you just have to win that race to be champion sprinter. So we'll see what they decide to do with Skelly from here on out. I guess, Craig, the thing that really bothers me is the other part that you noted, the fact that he has not been getting out of the gate that cleanly. And we can show a couple of the replays at Oaklawn. I'll just show the beginning of each of them. This was 2 back in the Count Fleet. He is number 4 this day. And it's not that he gets left, but he just breaks a half step slowly, not the typical reaction time that you see from a sprinter. You'll see him right in the center of the pack here. He's going to break towards the back of the pack and have to rush up. There's that white cap that's kind of moving through the pack. And he's got to be asked quite a bit by Ricardo Santana to move up on through and eventually secure the lead. And then from there, he just runs off and he's too fast for the rest of these to catch. It was a little more pronounced last time in that the Lake Hamilton Stakes. Can show that as well as we talk over it. He's been very impressive in these races, Craig. When I go back through it, aside from Tejano Twist, it's not like he's beating stellar competition, especially last time. I know Mish is a decent horse, but I mean, the rest of that field just weren't really competitive with Skelly. So no doubt he's going to make the frontier as long as he breaks somewhat cleanly. I guess the big question mark are the 2 horses that are drawn right alongside him, because the 2 Close the Game Sugar and the 4 Angkor really are the only 2 that have the speed to be in close attendance to Skelly early. And what happens if he breaks a length slowly and those 2 kind of shut the door on him? That's not a situation that you want to find yourself in as a 2 to 5 favorite. So I'm a little bit concerned about maybe the break getting the better of him, Craig. But that said, given his overall talent, he might be able to overcome it. It really, for me, just comes down to a question of value and how short a price you want to take on him in a sequence like this. In the pick 5 sequence, even if he's 3 to 5 to win the race, he could be 1 to 5 in terms of people singling him in the pick 5 in terms of his use within that wager. And I don't know if I really view him as being 80, 90% to win this race. So I want to be somewhat against him in here, Craig. I'll use him as a backup because obviously he can win this race, but I want to be open to some alternatives in here. And I think the one that you have to immediately turn to and we should talk about next is the number 1, Tejano Twist. He's been beaten by Skelly when they've met, I think just about every time they've met. So he's going to have to turn the tables on that rival. I will say I'm not going to be so hard on him for his last race in the Churchill Downs. It was a grade 1 affair that maybe wasn't a true grade 1, but still, it was going 7 furlongs. And I think he's proven that he's a horse that is much better going the 6 as opposed to the 7. You typically get more pace in the 6 furlong races. His late burst just seems to be more potent in the 6 furlong races. And also, I didn't love the ride that Irad Ortiz delivered in the Churchill Downs. He sort of kept this horse inside for much of the race, angled him back in for the stretch run. This is the kind of horse that gets himself really far back early, and you've got to wind him up with that run, basically when you hit the half-mile pole and make a big far turn move. And he didn't really do that last time. Maybe it was the 7. Maybe he just was a little off his game that day. But I just thought he was never really in position to run the kind of race that we had grown accustomed to seeing him deliver at Oaklawn. He's run well at Churchill in the past going 6, so I like this situation for him. And if the pace does come apart, if something gets in Skelly's way at the gate break, I feel like Tejano Twist is the most likely horse to cause the upset.
Yeah, I agree with your analysis of that last trip. I didn't like that ride at all. Particularly, as you said, Lady ducked back inside, and it just seemed like he had no interest in going through when he was taking dirt. Irad Ortiz kind of wrapped up on him when it was obvious he wasn't getting anything. So I don't think that's 6 lengths that he lost. It's not like he was really losing a length and a half the last furlong. He just kind of got wrapped up on. So if he can get back to those other figures, he's clearly the other horse to beat, or he's clearly the second horse in the field. So, yeah, I have no problem with that. I do worry. I mean, he's been dusted by Skelly basically every time they've raced each other. So, for me, I'd probably flip-flop it. I would have Skelly as a horse I'm going to lean on. But I will use a couple backups. And Tejano Twist would obviously be one of them. And there's one more horse I want to talk about who's much more of kind of a crazy long shot. But if things got crazy up front, particularly if Skelly were to get left and had to rush up and the pace gets hot, I'm kind of interested in Surly Furious, the 7 horse. He's a horse that I will definitely be playing in some verticals with these other contenders as well, because he's handled basically everything in his career. He's run on synth, he's run on dirt, he's sprinted, he's routed. But I almost wonder if maybe this isn't what he really wants to do, particularly at this point in his career. He kind of packed it in last time in the Ben Ali. But he's just an interesting horse to me, because I think there's a very real chance that this pace could heat up, and he could be picking up some pieces for some horses that are basically dropping anchor in the stretch.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to talk you off a 30-1 shot, Craig. And it's not like you're making this the strongest case for him. I mean, he's going to be a huge price in this race, and maybe he outruns his odds. He has been a horse that has achieved all of his victories on synthetic. He's 8 for 16 on that surface, 8 for 29 in his career. I mean, I agree. He's run some speed figures on the dirt that suggest that his ceiling on the dirt might be nearly as high as it is on synthetic. He just seems so much more inconsistent on the dirt, and he'll throw in clunkers and not run certain races. I do think shorter is better for him as opposed to longer, and they've tried a variety of distances with him, but I couldn't quite get there. But again, I'm not going to make some strong case against a horse that's going to be a huge price. I just want to circle back to Skelly for 1 second, Craig. One point I forgot to make with him is last time was the first time in his career they put on the front bandages, which are kind of hard to see in the replay because they're black. But I mean, if you go back and watch his prior races, he hadn't worn them before. So just something to note. This was a horse that around this time last year just mysteriously disappeared after going on a very similar schedule. And you just wonder if maybe there are signs that things are starting to come apart a little bit. Maybe I'm making too much of it, and I'm sort of, overanalyzing, some of these ambiguous signs, but I'm taking a shot against this horse in this race. And the other one that I'd be looking to use is the number 8, Hear My Song. I liked this horse in the Churchill Downs last time, and he finished second at 20-1. Got a very good scenario that day because that was a race that featured a pretty murky pace situation. He was able to find himself on the lead through some moderate early splits. I thought he was game, though, to battle back for second because it looked for a brief moment in mid-stretch like he might fade off the board, and he was pretty game through the last furlong of that race. He is a horse that doesn't need the lead. He's got a very versatile running style. He can rally from off the pace. He definitely can handle a variety of distances. I'm not so worried about the 6 furlongs for him, even though he's had more success going 7 in recent starts. I don't mind the outside post. I thought Tyler Gaffalione rode him very well last time. It was a big rider upgrade for that race. I'm happy to see that Tyler is back aboard once again. And I think he's going to be a bigger price than Tejano Twist, Craig. I would expect there to be a bigger disparity in the odds than the morning line shows. I think Tejano Twist could go lower than 5-1, and Hear My Song probably going to go higher than 6-1. So he's probably not as likely to win as Tejano Twist, but if he's, somewhere in the 8-1, 9-1 range, I don't think that's a bad price on a horse who ran a race last time that makes him competitive.
Yeah, I can see that. He's a horse who has won 6 times in his career, and I think 3 of those times have been at 8-1 or higher. Which, it kind of tells you he's sometimes a horse that's tough to get a read on, and sometimes he just runs better than what he looks on paper. So I've got no issue with him. He's pretty versatile and draws an outside post. So yeah, why not? I mean, if you're looking to beat Skelly, he makes as much sense as most others in here.
Yeah, and that's all due to the trainer, not a household name. But I mean, you could see this trainer gets an 81 overall TimeformUS trainer rating, which, I mean, if you're not aware of the trainer ratings, they're based on not just win percentage, but ROI in a variety of situations. So, he's had success with this horse and has had some success overall. So I'm not going to hold that against him. I like horses like that who don't get bet because they're trained by people that aren't household names, but sometimes they're just as good trainers as some of those that get all of the top horses. Well, I think we covered this one, so let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, Craig, out in distance to 1.16 miles for the Shawnee Stakes, as the fillies and mares will take the spotlight for this Grade 3 event. And I found this to be one of the more tricky races in the sequence, Craig, because the favorites aren't necessarily the most reliable. And I guess we'll start the conversation with Kijera, who was installed as the morning line favorite, the number 6 horse in here. I guess there's a temptation to just say, oh, she didn't handle the sloppy track last time, the La Troyenne. We'll draw a line through that race, and now she's going to get back to her better form on dry going. However, now there's plenty of rain predicted in the forecast, so she might get a wet track once again. Whether it's as sloppy as it was on Oaks Day remains to be seen, but that's a mild concern. And also, Craig, she was so impressive in that Seneca overnight when she first switched over to the dirt in September of last year. I mean, just a jaw-dropping performance that day, drawing off under wraps. And while she won her next 2 races, her Mother Goose was good. I think some more was expected of her from a speed figure standpoint in the Fall City. That was a race that I know you had to sort of artificially inflate because it just came up an aberrationally slow race. There really wasn't a whole lot behind her that day, and she kind of was supposed to win by 10 or 12, and she didn't, and was ridden harder to do it. I'm a little concerned that maybe that brilliance that we saw in September and October has left her a little bit, and even if it's a fast track, I'm not sure that I necessarily want to rely on her.
No, I definitely don't want to rely on her. I didn't like anything that I saw on, I think that was Oaks Day, when she was just basically terrible. I mean, she did a little bit of running against a pace that was well within her scope to be close. And if you want to excuse the sloppy track, I guess I get it, but I'm a lot more leery to do that. Most horses these days, the way they maintain the tracks, it's just not that big of a deal. And to throw in a total clunker, I'm more concerned, as you said, the way she kind of tailed off towards the end of last year, even though she was winning. I mean, I'm a guy who makes speed figures, and like you said, I was expecting more, and we didn't really get it. And then when she came back off of what was a pretty long layoff to throw in that real clunker, I have concerns, and not the kind of horse that I want to take at a short price. I've just seen way too many fillies in my life, and it happens with colts too, don't get me wrong, but I think it happens more with fillies when they just decide they don't want to do it anymore. And I almost got that impression from Kijera in her last start. So at a short price, I'm not interested in her at all.
Now, maybe she is a horse that just doesn't like rainy surfaces or wet surfaces. I mean, she also threw in a real clunker of a soft turf course in Saratoga last summer, a race that was run during a rainstorm. So I guess maybe there is some validity to give that as the excuse, Craig, but at a relatively short price, she's not one that I want to take. I'll be interested to see if she actually is the favorite in this race. I wonder if the bettors are going to go back to her fully after that poor effort last time, because like you said, it wasn't just mildly disappointing. I mean, she didn't show up at all that day. And I feel like I won't be surprised at all if Scylla does wind up the favorite in here. And maybe she's supposed to be because she's the horse coming in that still has upside. It's just the 6th start of her career. And she earned a speed figure last time, getting that 121 on the Derby Day undercard. That makes her competitive against these proven stakes horses.
Yeah, I think she will be the favorite. I mean, pretty sure she's been the favorite in every start except her first one when she went off second choice. And She's been good. I mean, you could say she's disappointed a few times at short odds when she came back to the races this year, but it's not like she ran bad. She improved her 2-year-old speed figures first time back. Then she, was able to just she ran a decent race in the double dog there. And then she kind of exploded last time. I guess the one concern would be that it was a 1-turn mile and all of her success has come at 1 turn. And the time she's tried 2 didn't really go very well. She didn't have a big excuse, except maybe that it was her second off a pretty long layoff. She came back in just a month's time. So maybe she was a little dull. I don't see any reason why this horse couldn't handle 2 turns. So I do think she's a major player in here, and that speed figure is legit.
The one concern I have with Scylla, Craig, is the strange move to put blinkers on for this race, because she seemingly ran a career best last time. And now Bill Mott's putting blinkers on. I'm going to put you on the spot, Craig, because I looked this up, and maybe you did too, so you might have the answer. But what do you think the sample size is for putting first time or just switches to blinkers on with horses that won their last race for Bill Mott?
I did not look it up, and I imagine it is minuscule. Probably, if any, it's got to be less than a couple in the last, like less than 5 in the last 5 years, I would say.
Well, you would be right with less than 5. I'm going to pull it up right here as we put it on Formulator. Blinkers switched to on with last out winners. Bill Mott is 0-3. One of them was a stakes race. 2 of them were on the turf. The best finish was a third. 2 of them were under 10-1. I don't care about the results so much, Craig. It's just a strange move to make. And I think that sample size kind of hammers that home. It's just not something you do as a trainer, putting blinkers on after a horse runs as well as Scylla did. Now, I would imagine that the impetus to put the blinkers on stems from sort of the visual on the backstretch of that last race, because Javier Castellano did have to get to pumping on her a little bit when she was in behind horses before she ultimately got into top gear and put that field away in the late stages. So maybe there's a feeling that she wasn't totally dialed in and racing in the bridle in the middle stages of that race, and they want to fix that. But still, I mean, she delivered a top effort, and I think there's some risk when you put blinkers on. I mean, it could make a horse rank, it might change their running style, and at a short price, that's enough uncertainty that I want to be a little bit wary of Scylla, because I do think there's a good chance that she does go favorite in here.
Yeah, I do think she'll be the favorite, as I said. And yeah, I mean, the other side of that coin is it's Bill Mott, who's one of the greatest trainers of our lifetime. And if he's doing it, I'm sure there's a reason. I think you even have to get permission when you come off a win like that from the steward. So I'm sure he had to give a reason to them at least. So yeah, I don't view it as a positive, but I'm not going to hold it against her too much given who the conditioner is. But that said, I still don't think this race that leaves her as a walkover if Tijera doesn't show up, because there's a few others in here that can run as well.
Hey, Craig, before we get to, I mean, I'm guessing that we like some bigger prices in this race. I don't know for sure, but Wet Paint is a horse that we should at least mention before we get to some others. I mean, she has, some name recognition coming in here. She obviously was the winner of the Grade 1 Coaching Club American Oaks last year. Probably not against the toughest field. That's, people say that I just criticize California Grade 1 races. That Grade 1 at Saratoga probably was not true Grade 1 quality. But she did tail off towards the end of last season, the Breeders' Cup. I mean, she got paced that day and just had nothing to offer in the stretch. And her Apple Blossom wasn't much better. I mean, we talked about it on the Pacecast earlier this week, that it's not like there was a ton behind a Dare Matter on that Apple Blossom and not a whole lot of running going on. And it should have been an opportunity for Wet Paint to at least pick up some pieces. And she was just never in the mix that day. I'm a little concerned that she's a horse that just hasn't gone on from 3 to 4. And I don't think you're going to get that much of a price on her, given that she, is that Grade 1 winner who's trained by Brad Cox.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny that you said, that we should at least talk about her, because I really didn't have a whole lot to say. I wasn't impressed with her return race. She's another coming off of that 3-year-old season into 4 that just didn't do a lot of running. And yes, Adair Manor is a very good one right now, probably leading the division. But there was not much else in there. Flying Connection, she's fine. I'm a fan of her. She's kind of the queen of New Mexico, but I mean, it's not like she's a top horse in the division. So there's also the thing that Wet Paint she has no speed, it seems, and it's always to her detriment. Every now and then she's able to win. She was just able to get up in that pretty weak CCA Oaks that you mentioned. So yeah, she's not for me in here. I suspect she will get bad. I mean, she's 7-2 third choice on the morning line. I could see her even dropping down to 3-1, but with the connections and the resume she has. But she's not for me. I just see a race where she's going to be last early, or if not last, pretty close to last. And it's going to be tough, especially if it's a wet track.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, we're showing the Apple Blossom chart here. I think it's a race where the speed figure has definitely been confirmed. I mean, it got a fast number, and most of the horses that have run back, I think the top 5 have all come back with subsequent performances, and they've run back to them. I mean, I think the star coming out of there in terms of improvement out of the race was Shotgun Hottie, who went on to win that race at Pimlico next time. But we talked about how Shotgun Hottie was a horse that was kind of cycling up to a better effort, so not a big surprise that she's the one that took the biggest step forward out of there. So I think Wet Paint's speed figure for the Apple Blossom, it checks out. I just feel like she's going to have to run a little better to win this race in all likelihood. And as you were alluding to, I mean, at a short price, probably not one that you want to rely on too heavily, Craig. Where are you looking to go in this race? Because I think you can make a case for a lot of horses.
Yeah, now I will use Scylla on my tickets, but more as a backup. And one of the horses I have to start with is Hidden Connection, a horse who beat Scylla 2 back when she finished second in that Double Dog Dare Stakes. And I mean, it's not like there was a big excuse for Scylla not to beat her that day. She's been in good form. She's run a lot of good speed figures that make her competitive. She's pretty versatile, tactical speed. I just don't really see any negatives with her other than, I mean, there are really none other than, I guess you could think she could get hung wide, but there's not a ton of speed in this race. And I think she's going to run very well again. I don't see why she wouldn't. And another horse right to her inside that I want to use is Hoosier Philly, a horse who, for the most part, I've been against her entire career, but I actually liked their last race at Oaklawn. It was the 2-turn mile there with the short stretch, but she looked like she is a horse who's maybe taken a step forward as a 4-year-old. She disappointed many times at 3, despite the lofty reputation. I remember she was the favorite in one of the Derby pools, which was pretty crazy at the time. And she didn't look all that great in her first return in that sprint race. But when she got out the 2 turns, I liked what I saw. I thought she was really professional. She was a little more easy to rate than she had been in the past. And I just think she might have another step forward in her. So those 2 are the 2 that would be the focus of my play.
You know, Crick, I was wondering if you were going to say that I was crazy for going back on my prior opinion of her, but we kind of agree here. I like Hoosier Philly in this race, and I feel like there's a chance that she actually could drift up a little bit off that 6-1 morning line. I know she's a horse that tends to take a lot of money due to her name recognition from early in her career, but a lot of time has passed since then. And I do think that Scylla could get bet quite heavily. Wet Paint, I mean, has to take a certain amount of money. And I think there's a chance that Hoosier Philly could be every bit of that 6-1, if not a little bit more. And look, she hasn't run quite as fast as some others in here, Craig, but as you were saying, I thought we saw some subtle improvement from her at the end of last season. Her cotillion was just fine. That was a good field, and she held her own against them. I'm not going to be too hard on her for the Breeders' Cup. And like you were saying, I mean, she needed the sprint off the layoff. She's not a 6-furlong horse, and she came back last time, and I'll pull up the replay of that race. She was much the best in there. I mean, she always traveled like the winner. She is a horse who typically travels into her races very well, and she's an eye-catching mover when you watch her. I mean, but you could see coming around the far turn of this race, she's the number 3. I mean, she is just loaded every step of the way. Remember, it is the short stretch run going the mile distance at Oaklawn, and typically horses from this position that are, covered up in behind runners, they're not going to have the time to draw off by 4 lengths, but as soon as she gets that daylight to run through in the last furlong, she quickly opens up on this field. Now, this was not a strong group behind her. There wasn't a whole lot of competition in here. She was 6-5 for a reason, but like the way that she's finishing up this race. And my biggest reason for liking Hoosier Philly in here, Craig, is her getting back to Churchill Downs. And I'm not somebody who is this big horse for course guy, but going back to the early part of her career, I mean, she won those first 3 races in succession at Churchill, just traveling beautifully each time, drawing off so impressively. And sometimes there are certain horses that do really seem to just do their best running at Churchill, more than we see at some other courses where I think people get caught up in records at the racetrack, and often I don't think it matters that much. Churchill can be one of those horses where we see horses that are, real specialists for that Churchill dirt surface. And, she just didn't seem to move as freely in some of the fairgrounds races that followed that up and lost her consistency. If you watch her workouts in the morning, she just trains really well at Churchill. And I'm kind of intrigued by her finally getting back to the surface for the first time since her 2-year-old season. And furthermore, Craig, we should talk a little bit about this TimeformUS pace projector for the race. There's really no confirmed frontrunner in this field. Maybe Kijera goes forward if she regains some of the tactical speed that we had seen from her last year, but it's not like she was really a frontrunner back then. And I think that Hoosier Philly and Hidden Connection in particular are going to go forward from the outside. And there's a chance that if those two are able to clear, they could back down this pace a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly the scenario I'm envisioning. I'm glad you mentioned it because that is a major part of why I landed on these 2 horses. I don't think there's a ton of pace, particularly if you think Kijera is off form like I do. But like you said, even if she is, I mean, she ran terribly last time, but she was still part of the pace early. But it's not like she's a front runner. It's not like she's out there setting fast paces. And yeah, I could envision a scenario where these 2 are running 1-2 and they're content. They're not going to battle each other. They're just going to get that position from the outside post. And they're both good horses. And the others that are inside do have some question marks, as we talked about.
All right, let's move on to the next leg of this sequence. Race 9 is the Grade 3 Regret, going the 1.125 distance for the 3-year-old fillies. Again, crossing our fingers, hoping this race stays on the turf. There is, I think, now just over half an inch of rain predicted that's supposed to fall beginning in early afternoon at Churchill on Saturday. So hopefully they're able to work this one out and keep it on the turf course. We'll see how that goes because there really isn't too much dirt form in this field if it comes off. Craig, I'll say I was reading our colleague Nicole Russo's advance for this race. She did report that the number 10, Faith Understood, is expected to scratch. She is cross-entered in the Honeymoon, I believe it is, at Santa Anita on Saturday. So that could affect this pace scenario a little bit because there is some speed in here, Craig. But the horse that I want to begin the conversation with is the number 5, Poolside with Slim. And she is a horse that I've had some affinity for. I liked the first couple starts of her career. I thought she was really impressive when she won that synthetic maiden race 3-back. And I think her 2 stakes attempts in the Florida Oaks and the Appalachian are a little better than they look. There was some pace going on in the Florida Oaks, and I thought she hung on pretty gamely to lead that field in the final furlong before getting caught at the end. That was a race where there were some horses that were making big runs from the back of the pack, particularly Dancing in Dixie, who is back in this field as well. But then last time in that Appalachian, I mean, I'll actually pull up the replay. That was a race that just completely fell apart from a pace standpoint. And I think that Poolside with Slim actually ran better than the running line makes it look because she's the number 1 in this race. She leads this field every step of the way. And you're going to see the horses that are chasing in behind her, they fall away before she does. And she actually leads this field into the stretch and is trying in the late stages before that early pace just takes its toll and the closers absolutely dominate this race. I think she's run pretty well against unfavorable situations in a few of her races recently. And I know the pace projector isn't predicting this to be a race that is favoring horses that are going to be on the front end, but I kind of view her as the lone frontrunner in this field, Craig. And I think she's going to be tough in this spot at what could be a decent price.
Yeah, she's going to be a price. She's actually, I'm probably going to use 3 horses in here. She would be a B for me, and I have no argument with anything you're saying. What I find interesting last time, none of the fractions were actually coded in red for that race, but sometimes on turf, it's a little bit harder to capture exactly what's going on. And as you say, when you look at the chart of this race, I mean, the first 4 that finished in front of her were all well back. I think nobody was closer than 5 lengths early on. They were way back in the field. So I've got no issue with Poolside with Slim. I do think there's a scenario where she's able to get to the front and, just keep going because she has been pretty game in the past. There's a little concern that maybe she's just not as good on turf as she had showed on synthetic, but I don't think we know that for sure. And she's going to be a price. The horse that I do like in here, and unfortunately she's the second choice on the morning line, is the one horse Way to Be Marie, who's coming out of the Edgewood. Unfortunately, we can't show that because it's a Churchill Downs race, but she was a filly who was coming out of the fairgrounds with just a gigantic number for a 3-year-old filly. She ran a 118 Timeform US speed figure with a weight adjustment. I'm thinking you have that off as I look at it. 117 without it. And, there were some questions about that figure because for one, it was much the best we've seen in the division. It came in just an allowance race, but I think she really backed it up in the Edgewood when she didn't get the greatest of trips. The pace was quick that day. She was caught wide from an outside post around the turn, and I thought she was really game. She eventually got ran down by a Chad Brown horse, Dynamic Pricing, but she looked like a winner up until about the last 30 yards of that race. And I think she's good. I think she's actually probably right around what we saw in that fairgrounds race. And I liked what I saw in the Edgewood where she showed some versatility. You always wonder when a horse gets a big figure going wire to wire if they're going to need the lead. Well, to me, she showed she doesn't need the lead. She's just a really good filly. So she's going to figure pretty prominently on my tickets.
Yeah, Craig, no argument from me. I think she's the horse to beat in this race. And I think when you take out the number 10, who looked like she was going to be forward as well, it does sort of create the situation where Poolside with Slim and Way to Be Marie, they just look like the two fastest horses in the field. I know the number 8, Sassy Princess, did technically lead in her last race at Keeneland, but she's not necessarily a natural front runner. I don't know if she's quite as fast as those two that we already talked about. And I'm not going to be surprised if this is just a race that's dominated towards the front end by these two horses. Way to Be Marie, she's obviously run the faster speed figures. I have no argument with anything you're saying about her. She probably did run the best race in the Edgewood last time, and I think she is extremely logical in this race and probably the most likely winner. What do you make of the morning line favorite, Craig, who is the number 6, Buku? She was obviously a little disappointing in the Edgewood. I didn't think she got a terrible trip that day. I mean, she was maybe a little closer to the pace than you would have expected, and they were moving up front, and she just seemed to lack some late kick. But I don't want to, use that as the excuse because Way to Be Marie was in front of her early and still was able to finish much better than she was. So Buku, to me, just didn't really run her race last time. It was a yielding turf course. She's probably going to get some give in the ground once again on Saturday if this race does stay on the turf. I thought she got a pretty good trip in the Appalachian. She moved a little sooner than some of the other closers that were really taking advantage of the race flow that day. And she sort of bobbled in the stretch in very late stages before sort of, picking it up again and holding off those horses. I wasn't sure what to make of that at the time, but now she came back and didn't run quite as well in her last start. So I wonder if she's a horse that's really moving in the right direction, whereas I think some others are coming into this race still having a little bit of upside.
Yeah, she hasn't taken a step forward. I mean, we saw her break her maiden at Churchill with a 108 Timeform US speed figure, and she's only run a 109 in both starts this year. And you could argue the Appalachian was maybe that didn't look like a grade 2 before it was run to me, and it didn't look like one after, really. And I didn't like her in the Edgewood. She didn't really run. It's not like she ran terrible, but unless you think she's going to take a step forward, I just can't see taking her at a short price. And there's also the part of the pace where he said, even though this one has the red flag, it's one of those where I'm just not buying that the pace is going to be fast. And I think that's going to be to her detriment.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be surprised if that red flag goes away. Well, maybe not, because Sassy Princess is shown as a leader type. But with the scratch of the 10, keep an eye on it, because that will update for scratches. The pace projector will update after scratches come in. Craig, I guess we'll talk about briefly the one other horse coming out of the Edgewood, Dancing in Dixie. She is just such a deep closer. I mean, she's run well at big prices a couple of times recently, really in 3 races in a row. She's finished 3rd in a trio of graded stakes events, but she just leaves herself so much to do. And she's one that I'd be more inclined to use underneath in trifectas, as opposed to viewing her as one that's suddenly going to turn the tables on these horses in a race where I don't think there's necessarily as much pace as she got in some prior starts.
Yeah, I mean, her moving at Edgewood was pretty eye-catching the last furlong. I mean, she was running noticeably faster than everyone else, but that's what happens when you don't really do any running early. And even though she had an outside post, she basically was never more than 2 wide till she swung out late. So she seems like one that's more best used in verticals than on the win end. I've tried her a couple times at those big prices, and she's run well, but mostly she disappoints. And at 7-2 morning line, maybe she'll drift a little bit up off of that, but this isn't the time to have her.
Craig, sounds like you're kind of keying in on the number one, Way to Be Marie. But is there anybody else at a bigger price that you wanted to mention in this race?
No, Poolside with Slim was the other, because I do think there's a chance he can steal this race. It just kind of, it's a strategic race, and we'll see what Brian Hernandez does. We know he values saving ground, so I'm sure he's going to get her out of the gate and get to the lead. And I just don't see her getting pressured very much other than Way to Be Marie. And to me, it looks like those two are winning. If I was are going to be where the winner comes from, most likely. If I was going to use a third horse, it would be Dancing and Dixie. But at this point, I'm unlikely to go there.
Yeah, there are a couple other horses I want to mention before we move on from this race, Craig. The one that I was kind of on the fence about is the number 9 Pin Up Betty, because she really has improved since getting on the turf. And, there were a couple of races at Keeneland on the turf that featured pretty fast paces. They were maiden and allowance races. I think we're going to talk about another one later where you sort of had to use the P designation for her race 2 back to sort of artificially deflate the speed figure a little bit, because it seemed a little too fast for the field to give the faster number that was generated due to that fast pace. But Craig, when I go into the chart for that April 13th race, there's a good argument that maybe this race didn't need the P designation, because horses have come out of this race and improved, many of them by about 10, 15 points. So, I mean, I think that there is an argument that maybe this was a stronger race than the number that we gave it. And Pin Up Betty, I thought, ran well behind a promising winner in Ready for Cheryl, came back last time and just demolished a maiden field going this distance at Churchill. I like horses that do have form over this somewhat quirky Churchill Downs turf course. And I know she wasn't beating much in that last race, but she earned a speed figure that's at least comparable to some of the races that horses have run against Allowance and Stakes Company coming in. My issue is I was looking up some stats in Formulator. I won't go through the process of pulling them up right now, but last out maiden winners trying turf stakes, Mike Maker is just 2 for 39, 5% with a paltry ROI. So not a move that Maker really has success with, but I think there's an angle to look at her from to say maybe she's just really improved on the turf and she's a little underexposed coming into this race. And the horse that maybe I'm even a little bit more interested in, what could be a bigger price, is the number 2, Everland. And you look at her and say, okay, she's a synthetic specialist who showed that she can handle the dirt last time in the Kentucky Oaks, where she really didn't run that badly, closing for 5th in that race. And her one turf race, when you scroll down, it was one of her worst speed figures, finishing 6th on debut at Kentucky Downs. I'll say when I went back and watched that race, it's not as bad as it looks. I mean, she was trying for the first 7 furlongs of that race and just kind of got tired at the end. That was a race that seemed like it was somewhat demanding for some reason. Even though the turf course was firm, a lot of horses were just falling away at the end, and a horse eventually won by nearly 10 lengths. So I don't think her finished position is as bad as it might look on paper. And she also really improved off the claim after that. I mean, she sort of ran up to that same level on synthetic in some weaker races and then took this big step forward once she was claimed by Eric Foster this winter at Turfway Park. I liked all of her synthetic races, and I think that her Kentucky Oaks at least proves that she really is heading in the right direction for this barn. Now, I don't love the Arrogates on the turf in general. His stats just aren't really there so far among his turf progeny. But the dam side of this pedigree is all turf breeding. It's a George Strawbridge family. The second dam is a horse named Rainbow View. I'll go in Formulator and pull up her PPs. I mean, she was a very good turf horse, actually a Group 1 winner in Europe as a 2-year-old. She won, I think, the Phillies Mile. Yeah, you can see here she went to the U.S. after that, ran some big buyers, graded stakes winner on the turf in the U.S. as well. And when you go deeper in this family, it is just proven turf, all turf horses. So I think Everland is a horse that at least deserves one more chance on the grass. She's in good form right now, and she's going to be a big price in this race. So she's one that I definitely wanted to upgrade.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to talk you off a 20-1 shot. There's certainly some positives there. My one concern with her is even on synthetic, she just hasn't run really fast enough to compete. But her grass race, I went and watched it too. She was wide most of the way on a course that probably was better on the inside. I don't think it was one of those super strong bias days, but you still wanted to be saving ground. And the horse who won by a lot. So the 12-length margin is not as bad as it looks if you remove that winner. So I see the signs with her. As for Pinup Betty, you'll be happy to know that that speed figure has already been adjusted. It's not showing up yet, but I had already went back and did that one yesterday. So it's a tough call with maiden sometimes because you have so little to go on. But I think moving that race up is the right call.
I'm impressed, Craig. You're one step ahead of me. Well, let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, race 10. It is the grade 3 blame back over to the dirt course. And while this field is obviously, all entered for the dirt, I think some of them were entered with a plan B. And there are 3 horses in this race, Uncle Jake, Classic Causeway, and 5-Star General, who all were entered MTO. I think it was either earlier this week or at the end of last week, 5 days ago, I believe on that Memorial Day Monday card. And they all ran that day when that race came off the turf. So it would seem highly unlikely that any of those horses are going to run back in 5 days, given that they all were entered in this race prior to that race coming off the turf. So it's not like any of them had intention to run back in the 5 days. So I think this field of 11 likely to be reduced to a field of 8, and that's certainly going to affect how this pace projector currently looks, Craig.
Yes, it is. I'm sure, like you noted before we began the show, all of those horses are listed 30-1 on the morning line, which I don't think they would have been if they were intending to run. So it seems like they're for sure going to be scratched, and it's going to greatly alter the pace projector. I mean, we have it with the red flag right now showing as a fast pace, but 2 of those scratches are the horses shown in first and third. And this is one, the red flag will definitely go away. I won't even be shocked if it's one that it turns into a favors early situation. I'll try, when you're talking, I'll try to do the math in my head and figure it out. But it's definitely one where it looks like the one horse, Frosted Departure, is going to be all alone on the lead, because that just leaves him and Trademark and Cagliostro. And those are horses who really haven't or don't run on the front end. So I think this is going to change quite a bit, and I think it's pretty relevant to how this race is going to play out.
I guess, Craig, does that make you like Frosted Departure? Because he's not a horse that I was inclined to go for. That I would really ever be inclined to go for. He's just not a horse that I've really been a big fan of. He has improved recently, and his last couple of TimeformUS speed figures, they do make him one of the contenders in here. I will say, I think each of his last 2 numbers to me look a little high for the fields. Last time, it's a day that you gave the C notation to the speed figure. It was a muddy, changing track, and I know those can be tough days to peg down a speed figure. I think we only had one run back, and it was on the turf, so I don't know what to make of that. He did get a very favorable pace setup last time. They just walked the opening quarter, and from there, he was just able to hold off the rest and pull away late. This is a much tougher field than what he's encountered the last couple of times. So he's getting a big class test here, but he does seem like he's a horse who needs that situation to develop where he is controlling on the front end, and he might get it here. So I'm not going to be surprised if he runs one of his A races. I'm just not sure his A race makes him quite good enough.
Yeah, I'm not going to lean on him. He wouldn't be an A, but I would use him as a backup, because when he gets loose, he runs some big numbers. And Ken McPeak is been very hot with his barn lately. So I don't want to totally dismiss this horse, because he's going to be in the very situation that we see when he always runs the big speed figures, where he's probably going to be in front. Now he's going to have better horses chasing him and trying to get him. And I suspect someone, at least one of them, or maybe a couple, will run him down eventually. But he's going to be a price. He probably won't be 15-1 on the morning line after, like he is on the morning line after the scratches. But I won't be surprised if he's 8 or 10-1. So I don't want to have to tear up my ticket if he does go wire to wire.
Correct. The number 2 Highland Falls is the favorite, and it's not a clever take, but I don't really have anything negative to say about this horse. I mean, he's just a lightly raced 4-year-old who has been improving with almost every start. I thought they asked a lot of him to ship out to California and try that Santa Anita handicap. I know it wasn't necessarily the strongest edition of the big cap ever, but he was still facing some proven older stakes horses, and he was finishing well that day. I mean, he at least proved that he gets these longer distances. He's going 1.1 miles today, was going 1.25 miles then, and I liked the way that he bounced out of that tough test in the big cap with further improvement in the Oaklawn handicap. Nobody was beating Skippy Longstocking that day. That winner put forth a huge effort, just always traveled like he had that race in the bag. But Highland Falls was really trying to this stretch, coming after him, put distance between himself and the rest of that field. And he's run well at Churchill before. I'm not saying anything clever. He's going out for top connections. He's going to be a short price, Craig, but this is not a favorite that I'm against.
No, I'm not against him at all. I would definitely use him. I mean, he's not a horse I want to lean on and say I'm only going to use 2 horses, because I think this is a pretty tough race. The only negative for me is the price, because I do think he's going to get bet off of those running lines. And the Oaklawn race was good. It was one of those quirky speed figure making days. That's why you see the C there for conditions, saying the conditions of the track. And even though it's listed, I don't remember, I think maybe there was some rain, even though it's listed as fast. It wasn't a typical fast Oaklawn track with that 6 track condition rating. So I think there was some rain going on that day, but the speed figures held up. So I don't really have any issues with it. Octane and Reincarnate have come out of that race to run as good or better numbers. So I think the number's fine. And yeah, I have no real negatives on him either. I guess the horse you have to kind of make a decision on is the horse who's the second choice. And he's the one that could easily vie for favoritism. And that's Tapit Trice, who's coming in for Todd Pletcher off the long layoff. We haven't seen him since the Travers. I would say his 3-year-old campaign was probably a bit of a disappointment, starting with the Kentucky Derby. He was a horse who just didn't really show up and run as expected in a lot of those races, but he's sure to take money. He's a contender if you think he's ready to go. What do you make of Tapit Trice in here? Because I do have some questions about him.
If Tapit Trice wins this race, I'm knocked out of this pick 5. I want nothing to do with this horse. Look, I think I picked him in the Travers last year. I gave him one last chance because I had this idea in my head that Luis Saez was doing this horse no favors in his races by sort of dragging him back early and then, trying to make these moves for a long way out, riding him into traffic a few times, and he made premature moves in his races. But then Jose Ortiz got on last time in the Travers and again made a premature move. It's just this horse. He's difficult to ride. He's difficult to manage. He's one of these typical Tapits that just seems to be a little bit of a head case. There's definitely talent there, Craig, but getting beyond all of those mental issues that were plaguing him last year, where has he been? I mean, it's not like it's the plan to go to the bench after the Travers when you finish 3rd in that race. I mean, there were big pots to go after that. I mean, he's a horse that maybe could have been pointed towards the Breeders' Cup Classic. He missed the rest of the year, and it's taken him a while to get back. I mean, I'll pull up, I'll scroll down a little bit and pull up his work tab for this race. I think he's had 13 timed workouts for this return, starting all the way back in February. So from February now to the 1st of June, it's taken this horse a while to be deemed fit enough to actually race. You might remember they entered him in the Ali Sheba on, I think it was Oaks Day, and I think the official line was that he was scratched due to the muddy track condition, but that doesn't then explain why there's a gap in his workouts from April 18th to May 10th. So clearly there was something else going on with Tapit Trice more than it raining a little bit at Churchill for him to not make his seasonal debut that day. And I don't want to make too much of workouts that happened a long time ago, Craig, but there are videos available of 3 of his drills on the way back from early to mid-March. And I think they were like the 4th through 6th workouts of his pattern, and they were not good. I mean, he was getting outworked decidedly by Classic Catch, who isn't exactly one of Todd Pletcher's best handicap horses. So I have a lot of reservations about Tapit Trice. He's not for me at all in this race, but I will transition to Todd Pletcher's other horse in here, Dreamlike, who I do think is a contender in here, Craig. He showed quality last year. again, another one of these horses that can be a little bit inconsistent at times. I mean, hard to explain his performance at Saratoga last summer when he was off the board as the 4-5 favorite in August of last year, but he bounced right back with one of the strongest efforts that we've seen from a Pletcher 3-year-old last year when he was second in the Pennsylvania Derby behind Saudi Crown, really relishing the sloppy track that day. So any moisture that develops in the racetrack on Saturday at Churchill probably not going to bother Dreamlike. And I thought his return, where he was a narrow second to Cagliostro, who's also in here, was just fine. And I think both of these horses are newly turned 4-year-olds that still have some upside.
Yeah, I'm with you on those two. They'd probably be the other two horses I would use in here. No knocks on Dreamlike at all. I remember he was the guy who was running in the stakes races as a ran in the wood, almost won the wood as a maiden. And other than that clunker he threw in at Saratoga, he's been pretty good since. I think I even used him as a long shot pick. I didn't pick him on top in the Breeders' Cup Classic because I thought that Pennsylvania Derby was good. And the figure he ran that day is actually, it might be just a hair high, but it's not like 8 points high. It might be 3 or 4 points high because all the other horses that come back to basically match what they've been running that day or at least get close to it. So I think he's good. And I know we talked about his return race on the Pacecast with Cagliostro, and we liked what we saw from both of them. And I expect both of them to take a step forward in this spot as well.
Yeah, and Cagliostro probably going to be the better price of the two, even though he beat Dreamlike last time. He's got better tactical speed than Dreamlike does, so I think he's going to be a little more forward, and that could be a real advantage in this race with those expected scratches, Craig. So I think Cagliostro is a major player, and I might even want to upgrade him a little bit over Dreamlike, just given the trip that I think he's going to get in this race. The horse that I had trouble making a decision about, Craig, was the number 11 Trademark. And I'm curious to know what you think about him because, yeah, that figure for the Clark might be a little high, but he still beat First Mission that day, a really good horse who would be the clear favorite in this spot. And he's an inconsistent type. He always has been. And it's kind of striking now that 3 out of his last 4 races have been real clunkers. So he's got to bounce back to better form. But I mean, the Pegasus World Cup, not a big surprise that this barn didn't have success at Gulfstream, a place that they don't have much success in general. And then last time in the Ali Sheba, maybe he was just one of many horses on that Oaks card that didn't like the sloppy track. We saw plenty of horses just really not handle the gubbing that day, including a bunch of horses that were supposed to do well in the Kentucky Oaks. So you could argue now, second off the layoff, we're going to see a better effort from Trademark, and he has bounced back from poor performances in the past. He's tough to rely on. I'd need a price on him, but I have a feeling that we could get it, so I don't want to totally leave him out.
Yeah, it's a tough post as well, but it won't be as tough after the scratches. The one thing he has going for him, and obviously this will include the last race if you want to pull up his record at Churchill Downs on the dirt, is he's been very good there. You can see at the top, he's 6 for 24 lifetime. He's 4 for 7. So that means he's 2 for 17 everywhere else. So this is one of those horses who I think clearly likes Churchill. He's not a horse that I love in this spot, but he is going to be a price, and I would probably put him on my tickets as like a C type because he can pop those big races at times. And given that the field's going to shrink, I could see him pretty easily getting a forward position from that outside post if he's in form. The horse I had more trouble deciding on was the 3 War Campaign, who is been running fast speed figures. He's ran 3 speed figures in a row at TimeformUS in the 120s. Ran good every time. He was second behind First Mission 2 back. Lost to the highly touted King's Barn last time. I just have a feeling, despite the speed figures, and this is the way I eventually leaned to leave him off, is that he's one of those horses I just don't think is as good as the numbers he's been running. It's hard to put a finger on why I think that. It's just watching the races, that's the impression I get, and I think he'd be running for minor places here.
I agree, Craig. I know he's faced good horses the last couple of times, but he was no match for First Mission or King's Barnes. And that Ben Ali was a race, and like, look, so some of the speed figures at Keeneland were tough this meet, but that was a race where you significantly split from Beyer. Beyer had that a slow race, and you had it a pretty fast race. And I don't know. I mean, we've seen 2 runbacks, and they've not been great. So I think you want to see a little bit more than that to basically render judgment on a speed figure. But I'm a little concerned if this horse isn't quite as good as some of those numbers make him look. And I think we've covered that one, Craig. It's a race where I wanted to go a little bit thinner, but I'm against Tapit Trice, but I do want to have some coverage beyond just Highland Falls because he is so obvious that I don't want to just put all my eggs in the basket of a horse that could be an underlay.
Yeah, I think Tapit Trice. I mean, he's a takeout remover in this race for sure if you don't like him, which neither of us do.
And let's close things out with race 11. It is the Audubon Stakes, like the Regret, going the same 1.1 distance on the turf for 3-year-olds, this for the 3-year-old males. And Craig, this is a race, even though it drew a larger field, that I found myself able to narrow down a little bit easier. And I'll be interested to see how this race gets bet, because I think there's a horse that could go favored in this race that I don't even think is among the top 3 choices. And that's the number 3 Cameo Performance. And look, I like this horse quite a bit in this race, and maybe I'm giving the public too much credit for seeing the same things that I do. But I think this horse, the 103 TimeformUS speed figure last time, and look, that's right in line with the Beyer. They also knocked it down a little bit. I think he got an 84 Beyer for the race. That's another one of these Keeneland races that featured a very fast pace, where we have seen the runbacks be pretty strong. I mean, particularly the runner-up Green Light, who we talked about on the Pacecast recently, came back to improve 18 points at his next start. Some other horses have improved more marginally in the 5 to 10 point range. I just feel like that was a pretty strong Keeneland maiden race. And for Cameo Performance to not only beat Green Light, but put 6 lengths between those 2 and the rest of the field, that really points that out as being a race of some real quality. I like this horse's debut over in Ireland. I don't know how much the connections paid for him to get him to this country, but clearly there were some expectations. Took a lot of money for the new barn, now trying a stakes race right off that maiden win for trainer Brendan Walsh. I get the sense this horse is pretty good, Craig. I don't think there's a prayer that he's 6-1 in this race. Is he going to be 7-2, 3-1, 2-1? I don't know, but I think he fits the spot pretty well.
Yeah, I like him as well. He's a horse, I think. And the one good thing with our P notations is in TimeformUS, you can see the final time figure, and I think he got a 110. And, it's there. It's not like we're hiding it, or a 111 he got. So we know that he ran fast, and we can see why. It's not like he was way off of that fast pace. He was in reasonably close attendance to it in what was a big field. So I think it was a race that's definitely better than the number shows, and probably more in line with that final time figure. And as you look through this field, there's not a lot of big speed figures in it. This is one of those rare cases where I think the Philly race is almost as strong as this one, speed figure wise. We haven't seen that a lot on turf lately, but that's the way I look at this one. I should note the number 6 Camaro Z, who could be a part of the pace here. He's entered on Friday, which is when we're recording this. So probably worth looking to see if he runs that day and is going to be in there before you do your handicapping, because he would definitely alter the pace flag of a fast pace if he comes out of the race. I don't think he's really a contender in this race. He's a horse who's done a lot of running on dirt, has some slow races on the turf that don't really fit in here, but he does have some speed, so he would come out of there. But I really like Cameo Performance in this spot. There was a couple others that I want to go on, but I wanted to keep it pretty narrow in this race. I thought about Leganos. He's pretty good. He could win this race, but he's been huge prices the last 2, just kind of picked up the pieces. I have a feeling he's going to get overbet in here. Cagino, he's fine, I guess. I can't get too excited about him. Like, if you told me he's really going to be half the price of Cameo Performance, I might go to the bank and take out some more money and go to Remington and just take my chances, because I think Cameo Performance is just a better horse. The one other horse I'll probably use in here is the horse on the rail, Nomos, and it's more just a rider and connections kind of thing. This horse has been getting better every single time he steps foot out on turf. I can almost assure that he's going to get a good trip on the rail from Irad Ortiz. And I've just seen this play out too many times with these connections where the horse will take another step forward, get a perfect trip, and get the job done. So for me, it will just be Cameo Performance as an A, Nomos More as a B. And I couldn't really make a strong case for anybody else. And I wanted to keep the ticket pretty manageable.
Yeah, Craig, this is one where, look, I think the pace projector is a really useful tool. Obviously, it makes you think about pace in a different way. I would say that some fast paces in races that horses are coming out of is kind of messing with the pace projector a little bit, because I don't think the Cameo Performance is going to be on the lead in this race. He is a horse that was, clearly rated in his prior start, and that was a fast-paced race, and that's the only race that we can base the pace projection on, because his debut was in Ireland, where there's obviously no pace data available. But I think it's showing him a little more forward that he's going to be in this race. You mentioned the possibility of Camaro Z scratching, and the 9, Lagunos. Again, he's a horse that had been involved in some faster paced races, had shown tactical speed on the dirt, but in his 2 most recent turf races, they've taken him right off the pace and have ridden him like a closer. So he's not going to be forward in this race in all likelihood. And, Craig, the more and more I look, the number 5, Formidable Man, there's a good chance he just controls this up front. And while I don't think that he ran so much better than some other horses in the American turf last time, he did get a strong speed figure for that race, and the pace was fairly honest. I think there was some advantage to being on the rail in that race, because we noticed horses that rode the rail in that American turf really dominate the trifecta, Lagunos being one of them. Lagunos is a horse that has been very fortunate with his trips. He's broken inside in 2 straight races at big prices and has ridden the rail to get good trips in both of them. Now he's drawn outside, so I think that could work against Lagunos. But Formidable Man, Craig, it was an honest pace last time. He led until the late stages before getting nailed by Trickery. We're going to, I think, see Trickery run in the Penn Mile on Friday night, so maybe we'll get some light into the quality of that race, even though it was won by a big long shot. Formidable Man, he had shown quality prior to that. I thought his mile night victory at Santa Anita 2 back was good, and he just might be a horse that's really moving forward at the right time for Michael McCarthy, and I think he's going to get a forward trip once again. So in a way, I think Formidable Man is kind of the horse to beat in this race. Again, I don't know if he's going to be 5-1. We'll see how the prices work out. I have trouble seeing him being a bigger price than horses like Twirling Point and Lagunos based on the last race, but I think he's a major contender in here. As for Cugino, the other horse coming out of the American turf that I wanted to discuss, I mean, you mentioned him just having solid form, and I agree with all of that. I think the thing to note with Cugino is the rider switch, picking up Flavien Prat for this race. Javier Castellano, he's been aboard this horse for every prior start. Nothing against Javier, and maybe it's just been circumstances, but this horse has not gotten great trips a few times, made some premature moves. He was extremely wide every step of the way in the Transylvania. And look, post positions have really played a big role in that, because he drew the far outside post in the Transylvania, and he was towards the outside last time in the American turf, where, again, he wasn't as wide as some others, but he was 2 to 3 to 4 wide throughout, and then swung widest of all at the top of the stretch in a race, like I said, that was dominated by rail runners. So I think there is an argument to be made that drawing inside especially, but also switching to a rider that is going to be looking to save ground like Flavien Prat could really benefit Cugino in this race. I'll say I'm getting a little sick of this horse, because he looked so good on debut and has sort of teased you each time since then. He's run well and not quite gotten the job done, but maybe the circumstances are going to be right for Cugino to finally deliver a victory again this time. So he's one of the 3 that I'm going to dial in on this race, those being Cugino, Cameo Performance, and Formidable Man.
Yeah, I like the case you made for Formidable Man. I probably overlooked him a little bit. And this is one of those races when I sit down this winter, as I do when I have more time, and kind of figure out how I can tweak the pace projector a little bit. This is one of the races I'll come back to, because I absolutely hate this pace projector. I think he is the horse who will be in front. And it's just a case, like you said, some of the other horses are coming out of very fast-paced races, but they're just not front runner. So it's something to keep in mind. It's hard to account for everything over every race. Every race plays out different, but this is one I'm just personally putting a big X through it. So yeah, formidable man. I could see Cacino. Really, I mean, he's fine. The negative is the price, because he's 7-2 on the morning line. I'm not going to be surprised if this horse goes off 2-1 with Pratt on his back. I mean, he takes a lot of money, particularly in Kentucky. People are going to notice that. So he could win. I just didn't really see any value there. And that's why for my other one, I'd probably go with Nomos.
Yeah, I mean, I took a long look at Nomos. He got a good trip last time, but was decidedly best over Thomas Aquinas, who's back in this field. I wanted to see a little more from him, Craig, but he probably does have a good trip coming to him, break from the rail with IRAD aboard. Well, that brings us to the end of the handicapping portion of this Pick 5 sequence, Craig. As we always do, we'll take do a brief recap of our opinions throughout the sequence and how we might play it. And I assume you agree with me. If races come off the turf, this is just a sequence I'm going to skip, because there's just not really the form in some of the turf races if they switch over to the dirt. But if this does hold together, even if there's some give in the ground on the turf or a slightly wet dirt course, I think that it's still one that's worth playing.
Yeah, same here. If it comes off the turf, I won't play. I would still play the races scheduled for the dirt, because I do like some of them. And that starts with the seventh race, the Aristes. I think Skelly's going to be tough in here. I know that eventually this can't last. He's going to have to try tougher, but I would still put a large part of my play through him. He would be an A. I would use Tejano Twist as like a B, and Surly Furious as a C, a horse who I just think is going to be running late, particularly if Skelly doesn't get out of the gate. But I think Skelly's probably going to win this race. No big surprise there. I'm sure he's going to be a very heavy favorite. In race 8, I'm against Kijira, the morning line favorite in here. Not going to use her at all. I'm going to lean on those two outside horses, Hoosier Philly and Hidden Connection. I think they're going to control the pace. Don't think there's a lot of speed inside. And I would use Scylla as a backup. I mean, she ran fine last time. I'm not too concerned about the blinkers being added for this one. She's pretty good, but she's got to prove it. She's going to be a short price. She's trying 2 turns again. Where she lost to Hidden Connection, fair and square. So I'm just not going to be overly enthused with her in this spot. In the Regret, assuming it stays on turf, I'm not going to go too deep in this one. I think Way to Be Marie is way the horse to beat. I'm surprised she's not the morning line favorite over Buchu. I guess I kind of get it, but I think she's the best horse in here. She's probably not going to be favored. I'll also use the horse you like poolside with Slim, because I could see a situation where she could go wire to wire. She's shown she's got good tactical speed. I see her races are better than look the last couple, and I'll give her another try on the turf. If I was going to use a third horse, maybe I would squeeze Dancing and Dixie, but likely I'll just stick to the 2 horses. Yeah, in the Blame, the horse that's going to change quite a bit with the scratches. I will use Frosted Departure. I don't love him in here, but he's going to get the trip that he likes, be out in front by himself. But I also want to use those 2 horses we talked about, Dreamlike and Cagliostro, coming back out of that same race. And kind of an equal strength. I would use them both as A's and Highland Falls as an A. And that's probably it for me. I'm not using Tapit Trace at all. Maybe Trademark is a horse I could squeeze in as a C. And then in the last race, the Audubon Stakes, I'm going to lean on Cameo Performance like it seemed like you would. And then I would use Nomos as a backup, maybe a B type. And you kind of talked me into Formidable Man as a C. I'd have to put it all together in Ticket Maker, but I don't think I went too deep in any of these races. I think it should be pretty easy to put together a reasonable ticket if these stay on turf.
Yeah, and for me, I'm going to kick things off in race 7, the Aristes, by trying to take a small shot against Skelly. My A's would be Tejano Twist and Hear My Song, and I would use Skelly as a B. I mean, if I'm writing some other legs, I don't want to lose if Skelly wins this first leg. But to me, he's just negative value based on some of the reservations that I have. So I'm going to downgrade him just slightly. In the Shawnee, I mean, the horse that I'm most interested in is Hoosier Philly, and I'm kind of considering making her the A with Scylla and Hidden Connection the B's. And there's really nobody else that I need in that race. In the Regret Stakes, I agree with Craig about Way to Be Marie being the horse to beat. She is an A for me. The 5 poolside with Slim is definitely an A. And I have to make a decision on whether or not Everland is an A or a B. The value that I think she's going to offer, maybe you should probably elevate her to A status. And then, Pin Up Betty, the number 9, is more of a C type for me. She would definitely be a backup in that race, but I would want to take a shot against some others that could take money in there, like Dancing and Dixie and Buku. I'm okay to leave them off my tickets. In race 10, the Blame Stakes. This is one that I wanted to narrow down more, but I think I'm going to end up spreading just a little bit in here. Highland Falls is definitely an A for me. Cagliostro would also be an A for me. And then I could probably make Dream Like a Bee, since I don't think he's going to offer a strong value as Cagliostro. And Trademark is a B or a C. I don't want to leave him off completely, but I also don't want to totally rely on him in this race, even though I think he's going to be a fair price. And then closing things out in the Audubon, like I said, I really just need 3 horses in this race: Cugino, Cameo Performance, and Formidable Man. If I can afford it, I'll use all 3 as A's, though if I had to upgrade one, it would probably be Cameo Performance. And that brings us to the end of this sequence, Craig. I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, it would be disappointing if rain really messes up this card. But I thought these were fun races to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of the calm before the storm next week as we get ready for the big Belmont Stakes at Saratoga, which I'm looking forward to. But this was a pretty solid card. I wasn't expecting one this good in the interim. Apologize to everybody because I've been attacked by a fly for the last hour and 10 minutes or however long we've been going. So if you see me swatting around, that's why I'm going to go on a mission to get him out of here after we're done. But hopefully it didn't distract me too much and we gave you some good opinions here.
Well, I think next week, Craig and I are just going to do one of these Timeform US podcasts. We'll see if we sort of make it a hybrid, looking back at some races and previewing the Belmont Stakes. There definitely will be some sort of preview for the Belmont Stakes and part of that card that's going to be taking place at Saratoga on Saturday, because there is so much to look forward to on that Belmont Stakes Saturday card, which will be drawn pretty soon. I think they're drawing it on Sunday and the Belmont Stakes being drawn on Monday. So hopefully we're going to get those PPs by Monday night. So we'll have to look forward to. We'll put out some information about what we're going to do along the lines of this podcast next week. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Timeform US Forecast. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Make sure to catch the Timeform US podcast focusing on the Belmont Stakes coming up next week.